Good evening. We are going to do a little bit of a Bible study tonight in Matthew chapter 14. We're going to touch on the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on water. I'm going to go ahead and start in verse 15. The evening came, disciples came to him and said, "This is an isolated place and the hour is already late. Send the crowds away so that they may go to their villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said unto them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here except 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." He ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looked up towards heaven. He blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. The disciples gave them to the people. Now, what I find interesting here, and this is what God showed me, not necessarily what I found, but what God showed me. Jesus said, "You give them something to eat." Their reply was, "There's nothing here except 5 loaves and 2 fish." Did Jesus ask them how much they had? For that matter, did he even ask them a question? No. He gave them a command. You give them something to eat. Now, mind you, they had just come back from their 2x2 missions, where he ordained them to go ahead and he imbued them with the power to cast out demons and heal sicknesses, right? Okay. So therefore, and God showed me this, they missed the opportunity that Christ was presenting to them for the Holy Spirit to work through them to the crowds. They could have fed them. That's what Christ was saying. You can feed them. You feed them. You give them something to eat. But instead they turned around because they were still carnally minded, small-minded, like they couldn't see the bigger picture still yet. And how many times in life do we do this? We're like, "Well, God, I don't have that kind of money," or "Wait, I don't have that kind of food," or "Wait, how do you want me to do that?" He didn't ask you a question, he gave you a command, right? Okay. So now let's continue. Jesus says, and this is how in my mind I see this happening, him going, "Bring him to me," "Oh, ye of little faith." But he says it with a loving, And so he does, they bring it to him, he blesses it. And then what does he do? He gives it back to the disciples. And the disciples end up feeding the people anyways, which they were going to do, which is what he commanded them to do in the first place. Just like Jonah, when he ran away from Nineveh, he got in the boat, he ended up throwing himself overboard, got swallowed up by a fish, and then got spit out on the shores of Nineveh. He ended up going to Nineveh, no matter what. Moving on to walking on the water. I'm going to tie these two together because God tied them together for me. And I'm going to show you how he did that. Immediately, he directed the disciples to get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of the sea. He sent the crowds away. After he dismissed the crowds, he went upon the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was already a long distance off from land, tossed and battered by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, 3 to 6 a.m., Jesus came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. Okay, so once again, in the very first verse of this portion of the story, it says he immediately directed them to get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of the sea. It was a command. We see this again. Oh, it's just my silvers. It was once again, he commanded them. He went off by himself to pray. He was practicing what he preached. He spent one-on-one time renewing himself with his Father, just Oh man, I love my one-on-one time with my Father, with God. It's just, I can't get enough of it. Unfortunately, I have to work. But but it says, but the boat by this time was already a long distance from land, tossed and battered by the waves, for the wind was against them. So in life, we get battered by the winds. We have spiritual attacks. We have, bills. We have work, things that that catch our mind and pull us off course. Okay. And it says, and the fourth watch of the night, 3 to 6, which is approximately 3 to 6 a.m. I find this interesting that it was at this time because, back whenever I studied Wicca, I'm not a Christian witch. You cannot be both. You are either a witch or a Christian. There is no such thing as a Christian witch. But that's when like witches and people who do witchcraft and all that, they believe that that's when the spiritual veil is the absolute thinnest. Scientific fact shows that between 3 and 6 a.m., that is when your body is the weakest. That's when the most people die. When I was in the hospital, we actually had the most code blues between 3 and 6 a.m. more than any other period of the day. So it was at this time Jesus came walking on the sea. Now, if you flip over to Mark 6:48, it says that Jesus actually intended to walk past them. That's interesting. Why? We'll touch on that here in a second. They were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. They were so afraid. They could not even see that Jesus was doing something that had never been seen or thought of before in their lives. How many times have we been too scared by something? Like this happened to me earlier today. I had a spirit of fear on me, and I could not see that God was doing something so amazing and so profound in my life that I never thought would ever be possible. And that's exactly what he was doing here. But they were so afraid they could not even see that it was Christ that was doing something so remarkable that they could never even think was possible, and he was doing it in their lives. Now, the interesting part of how these are two tied together, and the reason I brought in Mark 6:48, is because that whenever he was feeding the disciples, and when he was walking on water, the first time that he sent the disciples across was because he was in the boat with them. This time he was not in the boat with them. He intended to walk past them. So now in both of these stories, we see Christ giving them a command to do something, but they had to act on faith. You do it. Trust me. You feed the people. Trust me. You get in the boat and go to the other side. They had to operate off of faith. He was building their faith because eventually the disciples would have to operate on faith alone, because Jesus would eventually be ascended into heaven, and they would have to operate on faith alone. And this is what he was doing. It was a faith exercise for them. But you notice in Mark 6:48, it's once again, it said that he was just intending to pass by him. So yes, and he was handing that off to them at the feeding of the 5,000. But in both scenarios, he was still on standby, keeping an eye on them. Ooh. Yes, when we are in the middle of the storms and he's trying to do something amazing through us and work through us to get to people, even in the middle of storms, he is still there on standby, walking by to make sure that we are doing okay. I hope this was a blessing for you. Have a great evening. Leave your prayers in the comments, or send them to me in a message. Have a great night. God bless.